Here's my one-sentence thesis on Formlabs. This is the company that spent 15 years arguing that industrial-grade 3D printing shouldn't require an industrial-grade budget or an industrial-grade room to put the thing in.
That's a clean thesis. I'd add one word to it, wool so far, because the company that started by fitting stereo lithography onto your desk just launched an $84,999 machine. So the accessibility story is getting more complicated, and I think that tension is the whole episode.
Right. So the arc we're tracing today, MIT grad students, a Kickstarter that basically kicked open a market, a dual platform lineup across resin and powder, a founder still at the wheel, and a board appointment that has everybody whispering the letters IPO.
And I want to flag one thing right at the top because it's on their own materials and it shows up in coverage. Formlabs describes itself as the world's largest supplier of professional SLA and SLS printers.
Which sounds like a fact and behaves like a fact.
It behaves like a claim. I don't have an independent analyst report in front of me that defines largest by units or revenue or installed base or whether they're counting only lighting professional or industrial too. So when you hear it today, mentally file it as the company says, not the market confirms.
Fair. Let's earn the rest of it. Origin story first. So the founding, according to the company's own history page and a bunch of independent profiles, is 2011, 3 MIT grad students, one of whom is Max Lebowski, who's still CEO. And the problem they saw is one I think every maker recognizes.
The gap. In 2011, your choices in stereolithography were essentially buy a machine that cost as much as a house and lived in a service bureau or don't do SLA. There was no middle. Formlabs bet the middle existed.
And quick jargon check for anyone new. Stereolithography, SLA, is the process where a light source cures liquid resin layer by layer into a solid part. It gives you smooth surfaces and fine detail that filament printing just can't touch. Beautiful for detailed parts, messy to live with.
Messy is the honest word. Liquid photopolymer, gloves, alcohol baths, UV curing. But the output quality was the carrot. And in the founding intent, and this is a statement of intent, not a measured result, was industrial part quality at a price an individual professional or small shop could actually sign off on.
And then the move that made them famous. They didn't quietly ship to engineers. They launched the Form 1 on Kickstarter. That's well documented, huge campaign, and it did two things at once.
It funded them, and it proved the demand was real in public. That's the part I'd underline for anyone thinking about hardware. The Kickstarter wasn't just a piggy bank, so it was market validation you couldn't argue with. A wall of people prepaying is a very persuasive thing to show an investor.
And it seeded a community that's still kind of their thing. Direct to user, engineering forward, a little bit maker culture even as they've gone corporate.
That DNA sticks. You can trace almost every later decision back to it. Affordable-ish hardware, sell to the person actually doing the work, and control the experience end to end. Hold that last one. It comes back when we talk moat.
Let's do the hardware, because the lineage genuinely tells the story better than any mission statement. There are two spines here, the SLA resin line and the SLS powder line. Start with resin.
The resin line goes Form 1, then Form 2, then the Form 3, and the bigger Form 3L, and now the Form 4 and 4L. And the jump the company makes a big deal about, which is documented on their product pages, is that the Form 4 uses what they call masked stereolithography, MSLA.
Translate MSLA for the listener who just knows their little resin printer at home.
So classic form style SLA trace the layer with a laser and mirrors, point by point. MSLA instead uses an LCD screen as a mask and flashes a whole layer at once with a light engine behind it. The practical difference is speed. You're curing any entire cross-section in one exposure instead of drawing it. That's the generational leap they're claiming, and mechanically it's a real architectural change, not just a spec bump.
And for a shop, that's a big deal because SLA's old knock was gorgeous parts, glacial throughput. Speed is what turns a prototyping toy into a small production tool.
Exactly. Now, the other spine, SLS, selective laser sintering, instead of resin, you've got a bed of nylon powder and a laser that fuses it together layer by layer, and the surrounding unsintered powder supports the part. So no support structures, tough functional parts. That's a genuinely different manufacturing capability than resin.
And their SLS story starts with the Fuse 1, which was itself we're bringing SLS down to a footprint and price you'd actually consider move. Then the Fuse 1 Plus 30W is an upgrade.
And now the headline per news coverage, they launched the Fuse X1 in June 2026, a large format industrial SLS system at $84,999. That number matters because it's simultaneously a lot of money, and for industrial SLS, arguably cheap.
The coverage frames it as competing with far more expensive systems, which, I'll be honest, is exactly the phrasing that makes you go, compared to what, specifically?
Right, and I don't have the named competitor models and their price tags in front of me, so far more expensive is directionally believable but unquantified. Industrial SLS from the established names can run into the several $100,000 range, so undercutting is plausible. I just can't hand you the apples to apples chart.
And there's a name attached to the X1 in the coverage that's going to make people's ears perk up. It's reportedly already in use at Tesla's Gigafactory.
And here's where I put the brakes on. In use at Tesla's Gigafactory can mean one machine in a corner doing jigs and fixtures, or it can mean a print farm making production adjacent parts. Those are wildly different stories. The name is impressive. The depth of adoption is exactly the thing that isn't specified. So it's a real logo, unknown scale.
But zoom out on the lineage, and there's a clear intent. One desktop SLA box grows into two technologies that walk a customer from I need a prototype all the way to I need parts.
That's the deliberate part. They're not chasing every process, no metal, no wild multi-material stuff. 2 lanes, resin and powder run really well and grow the customer up the value ladder. That's a discipline a lot of this industry lacks.
Let's talk about who's steering. Max Lebowski, co-founder, still CEO, still the public face. And per trade coverage, he recently picked up the AMUG Innovators Award, which is very much an industry insider's stamp of approval.
The founder still driving part is genuinely notable in this sector. A lot of the 3D printing companies from that era got swallowed, spun, or churned through executives. Founder continuity usually means the original bet, accessible pro hardware, doesn't get diluted every time a new CEO wants a new strategy.
The AMUG Award, I'll note, comes to us through a news link we're reading as a summary, so treat it as reported rather than something I independently confirmed. But it fits the pattern. The
bigger governance signal is the February 2026 board appointment. Multiple news sources point to Rob Willett, the former CEO of Cognex, joining Formlabs board of directors.
And Cognex is a public company, machine vision, industrial automation. So the instant read a lot of people had was bring in a public company veteran. You're prepping for the public markets.
And I want to be careful here because that read got repeated as if it were basically confirmed. It's an interpretation. A board addition from the public world is a classic pre-IPO tell, sure. It's also just what a large private company does when it wants better governance, better financial discipline, someone who's sat in the operational scaling seats.
So prepping for an IPO and growing up as a private company, both explain the same move.
Exactly. And a fair question nobody seems to ask. Has Willett joined pre-IPO boards before that didn't end in an offering? Because if so, this means IPO logic gets a lot weaker. The honest statement is the appointment is real. The IPO conclusion is speculation.
Noted. Founder-led at the top, maturing governance around the edges. That's a company changing shape without changing its head.
Okay, the moat. Yeah, this is the part I actually find the most interesting because Formlabs' real edge isn't any single printer. It's that they sell you a reliable outcome and they build a fence around that outcome.
Break down the fence. What's in it?
3 walls, 1 proprietary materials. Their own site lists over 45 resins, and that number's countable, and probably right. 2 software, preform for prep, and their dashboard for fleet management. 3 the post-processing gear, the wash and cure stations. It's a tuned loop. Their resin, their profile, their machine, their finishing.
This is the closed ecosystem idea. And for a listener, that phrase can sound sinister, but there's a real upside.
There is. When the company controls every variable, the results are repeatable. You load their resin, Preform already knows the exposure settings, and part number 1000 looks like part number 1. For a dental lab or a factory, that consistency is the product. That's why people pay for it. So
now the company language on this is that the software ensures reliability and repeatability. And I noticed you didn't use the word ensures.
Because ensures is a marketing verb. I have no cited uptime numbers, no failure rates, no independent validation in front of me. The architecture is clearly designed to promote consistency. And anecdotally, the reputation is good, but ensures implies data I can't see. Is engineered to support is the honest version.
Same skepticism on the materials then, because they talk up next-gen tough resins that rival ABS and HDPE, and a patent-pending pure silicone technology for 100% silicone parts.
The silicone one I'll take as plausible. It's specific, and the patent-pending status is checkable. The rivals, ABS, and HDPE claim is the one I'd want a spec sheet for. Rivals on what axis? Tensile strength, impact, resistance, elongation, heat deflection. Those are real ASTM and ISO tests. Without those numbers, rivals is a vibe, not a measurement.
And there's a real engineering reason to be picky, right? A cured photopolymer and an injection molded thermoplastic can hit similar numbers on one test and behave completely differently over time or under UV.
Exactly. Resins have gotten dramatically better, genuinely. But as strong as ABS on a tensile bar and behaves like ABS in a part that lives in a hot car for 3 years are different sentences. So promising, take the comparison as marketing until you see the test standard.
The counter move to the closed fence is that they've announced a developer platform in an open material mode, cracking the door on the ecosystem.
A controlled crack. Open material mode lets you run third-party resins, but you're giving up some of that guaranteed outcome magic when you do. It's a smart concession because the closed model has a cost, and that's the part they don't advertise.
The total cost of ownership question. Proprietary resin isn't cheap, and you're buying it forever.
That's the recurring consumables model. The printers, the razor, the resins, the blades. Great for Formlabs revenue and a real line item for you. So the moat cuts both ways. Reliability for the customer, lock-in for the customer, recurring revenue for the company. Same wall, 3 different feelings depending on where you're standing.
So where does all this actually land in the market? Because Formlabs is not a hobbyist brand anymore, even if it's descended from one.
The center of gravity is professional and increasingly industrial. 3 verticals stand out in the coverage: dental, medical, and automotive. And dental is honestly one of the great quiet success stories in 3D printing generally.
And they've got named partners there. Bago for dental crowns, Medet for the digital dentistry workflow, the scanning to printing pipeline. Those are specific, checkable relationships, not vague we serve healthcare talk.
Dental's a perfect fit for their model too. Custom one-off geometries, high margins, a regulated environment that rewards exactly the repeatability we just talked about. When every part is different, but the process has to be identical, a tuned closed loop is a feature, not a cage.
On automotive, there's a Formlabs blog post about Bros, a tier 1 supplier, using both SLA and SLS to, quote, bolster automotive production. Plus, the Tesla mention we already poked at.
And this is where I want to keep us honest, because the phrase that keeps getting used is end-use production. That's a big claim. End-use means the part goes into the product that ships, not a fixture on the assembly line, not a prototype.
And the Bros piece is a company blog post, so it's telling their side.
Right. It may well detail genuine production applications, but I'd want one concrete example. A specific end-use part in a specific shipping vehicle or cleared medical device at a specific volume. Absent that, end-use production is a category the company is claiming more than a thing I can point at. The wins look real. The generalization runs ahead of the evidence.
There's also a footprint signal. They opened a regional headquarters in Milwaukee, which reads as, "We want to be near the American industrial heartland."
The event's real, the interpretation is theirs. And the question I'd ask is just, is Milwaukee a sales and support office or an actual operational hub? Those signal different levels of commitment. Being near manufacturing customers is smart either way, but the depth matters.
And competitively, who are they up against? Because the desktop pack is one thing, the factory floor is another.
On the industrial SLS and SLA side, like you're talking about the established players, 3D Systems, EOS, the companies that have owned the six-figure and up machines for decades, Formlabs is doing to them what it did to desktop SLA back in 2011, showing up cheaper and easier and daring the incumbent to explain the price gap.
It's the same playbook, just aimed higher up the ladder.
Same playbook, harder game. Buying a desktop resin printer is a discretionary call. Qualifying a machine for a production line is a procurement and engineering process, and it's slow, and cheaper doesn't automatically win it. That's the leap they're attempting now.
Which brings us to the hard parts, the turning points. And unlike some companies we've covered, this isn't a story of scandal. It's a story of transition, which has its own risks.
Let's start with the financial headline and immediately caveat it. The company reported a record-breaking Q4 2025, driven by the SLS line. Formlabs is private. It doesn't have to open its books. So record-breaking is a company-provided figure, not audited numbers I can check.
And record revenue famously doesn't tell you about profit.
That's the question underneath it. Record top-line growth is great. But is it profitable growth or is it growth bought with heavy spend? You know, for a private company, you can't tell from the outside. And that distinction becomes enormous if they ever do face public market scrutiny.
Second turning point. In 2024, they acquired Micronics, a desktop SLS startup. Small, but interesting given SLS is now their growth engine.
Interesting and worth a question. Was that a technology buy or an acqui-hire? Did Micronics bring unique IP that shows up in something like the Fuse line, or did Formlabs mostly want the team? The acquisition's public and plausible. The strategic value is the part I'd want to understand before calling it a coup.
Third, and this one's a business model move. They launched a service called Form Now, professional 3D printing without owning the printer.
Which is a genuinely notable shift for a company that has always sold you the box. Now they'll just sell you the part. That's Formlabs saying, we don't only want to be a hardware vendor, we want to be a manufacturing platform.
But there's an obvious tension there, right? If I can just order parts from you, why do I buy your printer?
That's the cannibalization risk, and it's real. Now, in practice, these often target different customers. Form now probably makes sense for the low utilization buyer, the shop that needs parts occasionally and can't justify a machine plus the resin plus the maintenance. The high volume customer still buys hardware, but probably is doing work in that sentence, and it's a live risk, not a solved one.
And then the fourth thread ties it all together. The Willett board appointment and the IPO speculation that lit up around it.
Which again is sentiment, not a filing. Record revenue plus a public company board hire plus a services expansion is a very IPO-shaped silhouette. But it's a silhouette. Nobody's confirmed a plan. I just want listeners to hold shaped like and confirmed as different things.
It's funny, we've watched the other end of this transition play out too. The consolidation wave, the big players buying each other. Formlabs is the counter story. Still independent, still deciding what it wants to be when it grows up.
And that independence is an asset right up until the moment it needs a lot of capital to fight for the factory floor, which is exactly what makes the next chapter interesting.
So, future watch. Let's separate the signals from the fortune telling. Signal number one, obviously, does Formlabs go public and when?
And my honest answer is unknowable from here. The signals point that direction, but I'd watch for the concrete stuff. A CFO hire from the public world, an S1, a formal announcement, board additions, and record revenue press releases are preconditions, not proof. Don't let the vibe harden into a date in your head.
Signal 2, which I actually think is the more important one for the technology story. Can the Fuse X1 win on the production floor against 3D Systems and EOS?
That's the real battle. And here's what I'll be watching from a teaching this stuff perspective. It's not the printer spec sheet, it's qualification and service. Can a customer validate that machine into a repeatable production process? And when a Fuse X1 goes down on a Tuesday, how fast does Formlabs get it running again?
Because a service contract on a factory machine is a totally different animal than a desktop warranty.
Completely. Uptime is the currency on a production line. The incumbents have decades of field service infrastructure. Formlabs grew up shipping boxes to individual engineers who tinkered. Building industrial grade support at scale is unglamorous, and it's exactly where a lot of ambitious hardware companies stall. That's the risk that doesn't show up in a launch photo.
Signal 3, whether Form now becomes a real recurring revenue business or stays a side dish, and whether it eats hardware sales doing it.
No data yet, so that's genuinely open. The optimistic case is it captures customers who'd never have bought a printer anyway. The pessimistic case is it quietly gives your low utilization buyers a reason to skip the purchase. I wouldn't assume the rosy outcome just because the company does.
And there's a softer signal in the coverage too, a brand leader reportedly leaving for a newly public company.
If that departure happened and it's reported, then one person leaving is just a data point. It's only a story if it's a pattern. Companies in transition do lose talent, sometimes to the exact public market excitement they're generating themselves. So I'd watch for a trend, not overread one exit.
So the confirmed plans column is honestly short. New flagship printer, an acquisition behind them, a service launched, a board seat filled. Everything sexy about the future is inference.
That's the accurate framing. The facts are modest and solid. The narrative is exciting and speculative. Our job is just to not glue them together.
So let me land the practical takeaway. Why does Formlabs matter? Because they proved twice now that a category of machine everyone assumed had to be expensive and institutional could be smaller, cheaper, and put in front of the person actually doing the work. First with desktop SLA, now they're testing whether that same trick works on industrial SLS.
And who should pay attention if you run a dental or medical lab? They're arguably already the default, and you should understand the total cost math on those proprietary materials before you commit. If you're an engineer or a small shop, they're the most credible on-ramp from prototyping into small production. And if you're an incumbent in industrial powder bed printing, the Fuse X1 is a machine you have to have an answer for.
The one open question I'd have listeners track:
whether Accessible survives the move to the factory. Formlabs' whole identity is lowering barriers. The production floor rewards scale, service muscle, and deep pockets, all the things that tend to push a company toward being exactly the kind of expensive institutional vendor it's set out to undercut. Can they industrialize without becoming what they replaced?
The accessible industrialist trying to stay accessible. That's the whole company in one tension. And the IPO question. The Fuse X1 in the field and Form Now are the three places we'll find out. Watch those. Ignore the fortune telling.
And take world's largest and rivals ABS. With the same grain of salt, you take any spec you didn't test yourself. Impressive company. Just read the fine print.
That's Formlabs. Thanks for spending the layer lines with us. We'll see you next week.